James Kalm, your insurgent, half-assed art reporter, and today we are back out here in Bushwick at 56 Bogart Street. So we're gonna run into Slag, contemporary. And look at an exhibition of objects, sculpture, painting, something. Well, we're going to snag Ben Godward and talk a little bit about the show, and it's titled
2.5D Realities and Tchotchkes.
Or 2.5 Realities and Tchotchkes. Well, let me sweep the gallery. Let's start over here and look at some of, I guess you would consider these, we were talking about this, objects, sculptures, but we're kind of talking about how this mingles the whole idea of painting and sculpture and maybe process all together. Well, what is your concept? I mean, how do you see these? You see them as painting, sculpture?
I see these as paintings
Objects?
and sculptures, for sure, both. I think they're definitely related to the history of painting, but I see them as sculptural objects that maybe function in some ways as image in painting.
Now, are these untitled, or do they each have individual titles, or?
Oh, they have individual titles.
Okay, well, what's the title of this one? Do we know? Okay, you don't have to know this off the top of your head. It's always a question. Tell us a little bit about your materials that you're using.
So this is a urethane resin. I hand pigment the resin. It's
With what kind of pigment?
Oh, I use various pigments. Sometimes we use Day-Glo pigments. Sometimes they're special Milliken brand pigments that are urethane specific.
I mean, do you actually use the dry powdered pigments, or these liquid pigments? Or?
Both. Yep. Some are very industry specific.
And what is the size of these? Is it about 24 by 30? Is that what size
Exactly.
the panels are? Yeah, okay. It's one of my talents is guessing the dimensions on these. You were also talking a little bit about how you kind of linked in with the history of painting, and we were talking a little bit about some of the famous stain painters. I was thinking of Morris Lewis and some of his things, but you know, the great thing about this is that you really do kind of push this into a new territory with the, I guess what you would call the transparent or translucent pigments, and yeah, the transparency that you have there, you know, makes you read the color a little differently. And also this kind of relates to Duchamp's large glass. You know, the part about his work that he thought was kind of unique was the fact that rather than making a painting, he was making something that you could see through. And in that way, this kind of relates to that. But I love the when you got some metal flake in there. Is that what that is? Some kind of...
No, those are just bubbles.
Those are just bubbles, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, let's keep moving. So what was your kind of ideas in relationship to someone like a Morris Lewis or even a Helen Frankenthaler, you know, the poor painters?
I enjoyed both of their painting a lot. I guess my relationship to them would be trying to keep these, you know, in a lot of ways as simple and as, you know, just really focusing on gravity and trying to get as much as I can out of like a very simple set of options, requirements.
Right, you have a certain number of procedures you run through. I was noticing too that kind of the way these end up compositionally really does depend a lot on the process that you're using of pouring in the various layers and working this. Like here we have our striations of color, but then you've got this a big pour down the center. And I was thinking that a lot of this you're kind of working in reverse, right? Like the color that you see in the background is actually goes in what last, or is so
Yeah.
this kind of this figure section, the main pour sort of goes in first, and then which is kind of the opposite of what you would get if you were working on a canvas, maybe.
Yeah, there's also no painting over it.
Right.
It's rather permanent.
You know, and here's a good example of what I was talking about. Here you've got the lines kind of in the center, and then this one here you've got kind of the lines starting on the edges and then being poured towards the center.
Yeah.
Give us a quick little kind of a choreography of how you would pour something like this, if that's not
Well,
too secret. You have a secret
so like
process.
the first step would be an orange coming down here, and the orange leaves a little trail. You know, that's a transparent orange. And then maybe we'd come in here with a green or blue, and that would come in. Then later on, maybe a white comes down and it comes across and interacts with this gray.
I was just asking you how much of this is done wet and wet. I mean, do you let parts of this dry and then do you come back in with more liquid resin, or is this all liquid at the same time and it's all kind of
No.
congealing it together one time, or?
No, there's basically no wet into wet. So each layer is defined. The way I get wet into wet effects are laying the object kind of forward or backward from the picture plane, where you get transparency onto transparency, which creates a wet on wet effect.
So how long would you be working on something like this?
This piece will probably take me a week or two of solid work.
And then, so you make a pour of one color, and how long do you have to wait for that to set up before you could start working with it on another layer of resin?
Each pour will take about 15 or 20 minutes.
That's not too bad.
No, I mean, and then depending on the consistency at which you pour it, the next pour can happen depending from 5 minutes to 10 minutes.
So there is a lot of difference in the different types of resin you're using and the different pigments and the way that the pigments interact with the drying time of the resin and all that stuff. There's
I mean,
alchemical
there is a little
quality.
alchemy, and just paying attention to what's happening, how hot the studio is that day, how hot the whole piece gets.
Humidity and everything else. Huh?
Yeah, it definitely affects.
You know, I love the way that you do have the kind of the more opaque versus the more transparent. In that way, I'm almost kind of wondering why you decided to, say, exhibit these near the wall like this, like a painting, rather than standing free that, they could have been looked at from both sides. Does that make a difference to you? Could you actually take these out and flip them around and exhibit the other side if you felt like it?
You sure could.
Are they as good? I mean, do you have a front side and a back side, or does it kind of just you leave it up to the people that have the pieces?
Yeah, I think some of them have really great backsides. I think I displayed them.
You've got to be careful with that terminology.
They got really
good
great
backsides, yeah, you can get into trouble.
I think I displayed most of them in the direction that I was working on them and trying to deal with certain elements with especially with the opacity versus the transparency. Certain sides have to have, kind of back painting or underpainting.
Okay.
And then the transparency over top becomes important on one side more than the other side. It's a difficult thing to talk about.
Well, I know that you basically kind of considered yourself a sculptor that uses color, but like I said, this is actually very close to painting.
I have no problem with that.
Do you spend a lot of time like thinking about the color compositions that you're working with? Because
I do.
So this piece over here is more of maybe the earth tones and grays and a little darker things. This one here is more pastel, and
Yeah.
you've got a few dark ones in there, but it's obviously much more spectral color.
Oh yeah, definitely has a lot more to do with yeah.
How much do these things weigh? I mean, basically you've got I don't know. I guess it goes about a half an inch thick of resin in there between the two sheets of plexi, and
They probably run
Some
somewhere
of them
between
get more
20
heavy?
and 30 pounds.
okay,
So they're not light.
that's hefty.
Yeah.
I think the other thing I was noticing is that you've decided to kind of hang these in a little rack or a little shelf on the wall, but this is all basically clear plexiglass.
Yeah. I guess that relates back to your question of why they're not hanging in the middle of the space. And part of that is to not shy away from the fact that they're paintings. And the other half is trying to figure out a language that they spoke with the language that they were doing. I was trying to come up with steel frames and structures and things.
Right, something like Robert Ryman used the little, I think he's got like 50 different little clips and bolts and ways of hanging things on the wall. But I think the other thing we were sort of talking about, although these do relate a lot to paintings, that you wanted to keep them also as objects, and when you have them, say, placed like this in these little racks, it almost invites someone to, like I was saying, you could pick it up, flip it around from one side to another, turn it upside down, right side up.
Here, let's do that.
And,
Let's do that. Let's take this one around.
okay, that looks
So-
cool.
As you can see, there's quite the difference on the two sides. This is one of the first ones. I found a bunch of these plastic boxes and started filling them with resin. That's kind of how it started.
Oh, I think we just talked to a young lady that was in here looking, and she said, these are luscious. And they really are luscious. But speaking of luscious, we're going to take a look at here at your, I would consider this entire piece an installation. But obviously, how many individual pieces are here? There must be
I'd say there are
150 or something like
there
that.
are 120 cubes.
120 cubes.
And then there are, I would say, about 75 crystals, or diamonds, gems in the center. And we were talking about color combinations. Use these as like, test tiles or
Kind of like studies, color studies
exactly,
for the pieces.
paintings,
And those are what? Is that a 2-inch square, 2-inch cube? Is that
Yeah,
what those
they're
are?
2-inch square cubes from ice cube trays. Fancy whiskey ice cube trays.
Fancy whiskey.
Oh yeah.
I was thinking, it kind of made me think of Jello cups or something. How much control do you have over the color? I mean, when you're mixing this in, the pigments in with the resins and things like that, does that, when it hardens up, do they stay pretty much the same color, or is there variations or things that change?
It depends on the different consistencies of resin. There are opaque resins that start out clear and go to
Milky or
opaque white. Yeah, an opaque white, and some stay
Wow.
transparent.
Okay.
But I think I have a pretty good handle on mixing the color at this point. I've been playing with these urethane foams and resins for about 10 years. So.
I think I might have talked to you about this, maybe one of your last shows down at Norte Mar, where I was saying that I liked the colors that you were using at the time, but they were mostly synthetic colors, and I said I'd also like to see maybe some browns or earth tones, just as some way of kind of relating that back to classic paintings and people like Rembrandt and all that stuff. And I think that you have gotten into some browns and grays and beiges and
Definitely.
some of these other colors.
And they do some amazing things with some of the synthetic colors.
Exactly.
The combinations are my favorite when they're like a brown next to like a teal. Like this one has some like beautiful like earth tones in the middle that really pop.
You know, the other thing is that as I'm looking at this, I also sort of get a feeling for some of the action painters, maybe a Jackson Pollock, in the way that, well, like your gestures here with the little drips, but in a certain way, these actually, like this piece, your little splatters run off into 3 dimensions here, so you're kind of taking that kind of painterly action and extending it into a, 3-dimensional sculptural realm.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we hit on a few of the interesting qualities of the work.
Thanks for coming by.
So, Ben Godward, and the title of the show is Tchotchkes and
2.5D realities.
2.5D realities. Tchotchkes, what was it? There was
2.5D realities references the fact that we could be living inside of a hologram or a computer-generated reality.
Okay. I know there's a lot of people in New York that live in that world. And we got some red dots in there too. Anyway, here at Slag Gallery at 56 Bogart Street. And say it with me, folks. Thank you, Kate.